Okay, I think we can go ahead and begin. So again, welcome to Leveraging BIM in Your Organization webinar series. This is our third and final session in that series, How to Eat the BIM Elephant. All attendees are in a listen-only mode, but if you do need to communicate with any of us, or when it's time to ask questions, or if you have questions throughout the presentation, you can use the questions panel that's located inside the GoToWebinar panel there. Go ahead and type in your question. If you do have a question for a specific presenter, feel free to put their name in there so that we know who to ask, and we'll address those questions at the end. This session is being recorded, and without further ado, I will turn it over to the CFTA president, Sue Stewart from the University of Texas. Okay,
Thank
Sue,
you.
you've got the floor.
Thank you, Lisa. Hello and happy 2021. On behalf of CFTA, I'd like to welcome you to our third session of Leveraging BIM in Your Organization. CFTA is truly honored by your continued support, especially during these unprecedented times. We're thankful for all of you who make up this unique professional community of resource sharing and look forward to some exciting opportunities to connect in 2021. So today's session on Eating the BIM Elephant is brought to you today by CFTA's star partner, IMAGINiT, and CFTA Diamond sponsor, CADD Microsystems. I would like to thank everyone who has worked with us to put together this entire three-part series, and I hope you found these informative and impactful. I'd like to thank our panelists in advance for their participation and sharing their experiences. So I will turn this over to Peter, who will get our presentation started.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Peter Costanzo. Let's head on to the kitchen. As I mentioned, my name is Peter Costanzo. I'm with IMAGINiT Technologies. I've been here for about 16 years. I'm one of the team leads for our facilities management practice, and I'm having a lot of fun in my job right now. Digital twins and digital data are becoming more important, and Autodesk definitely has some products and services around that. We'd Revit in different places. One of the things I talk about myself a lot, I get involved in discussions with AEC professionals and owners about how to get data back and forth. And unofficially, outside of our digital twin evangelists, I joke that I'm our AEC professional owner therapist. Just to take a quick look at the agenda, and I want to thank our marketing department for giving us some cute slides. Don't be scared of the elephant, it's not bad. I was going to talk a little bit about one of the questions asked on the BIM adoption at the last session. Then I'm going to talk about some things at a very high level. I'm going to hand it over to Joe and DeVon, who are going to talk about how they ate the BIM elephant to their organizations. Then TJ is going to join us from CADD Micro to talk about utensils and recipe for success. And then I'm going to talk about the CFT resources that you have if you're ready to embark on the BIM journey. And then we've got some time for questions. So I kind of mentioned our guest speakers kind of before. I just want to mention that Amy Zabel-Peets from the University of Madison, Wisconsin, isn't joining us today because she's kind of more manager level and we're going deep into picks and clicks. But if you do have questions for how they approach things, she is listening in today. So from our last session, we had a question. We said, hey, what stage of BIM adoption is your organization? And about 40% of you guys are researching. What I was excited to see is 27% of you are actually on a path. And one of the things as I work with organizations is, and it's good to talk about all of you in this, is for those of you who are researching or developing, compare notes with other organizations. BIM is not a one-size-fits-all at every organization, and I think you can benefit from comparing notes with one another. So, I'm sorry, I'm laughing, I'm looking at the little elephant. Don't be scared by the BIM elephant. So when you're ready to go, just take your time. Elephants can kind of be cute. We've seen a baby elephant running around, small enough to fit on a spoon, but it's really easy. You do it one piece at a time. So first thing you do is you come up with a plan. You establish your goals and figure out what you're going to do. You create a recipe, your approach that's going to work for your organization. And along the way, you're going to decide what utensils or tools you're going to use. And you're also going to remember that you need nutrients or support or benefits to move along on a BIM diet. So from a meal planning perspective, BIM is no different than any other IT process. There are two things that are being looked at: data elements and processes. It gets a little weird sometimes because IT understands a data element like a building floor room table, but a graphical file is a little different. It's becoming more common in the IT world though, but in most IT projects, you have kind of three questions people start with. They say, hey, what data is going to be needed for us to do this, right? And if we talk in a facilities management perspective, we can say, hey, building floor room, right? We're going to want the room area we're going to take from the model. We might start populating our pieces of equipment. And as you do that, you'll get a list of data that you need for your project. The second thing is, how's it collected? And this is really important because as you look at new construction, there's tremendous value to be gained if you can get good data during the construction phase to populate your maintenance management system, for example. And that's what, when you're in that environment though, usually it's not someone doing construction sitting in front of a computer. You don't do the same things at the same time. So you're going to take a look at how you're collecting the data. And some of that data might be in an Autodesk product in BIM and in Revit, and some of it might not. The third is, how's it maintained? And I love this question because whenever it's asked, the list from number one gets short. So you look at what is maintained, and if you talk about all of this, it's really nothing than a data standard. And standards are very similar as we talk to about meal planning. And once you've got a plan, you can move forward. I talked a little bit about utensils, right? So what tools do we have? Leveraging the right tools. And I'm excited that TJ joined us from CADD Micro. I talk in an IT realm about BIM standards, and TJ's got a flair as an architect where I can talk more with the IT departments. I've seen him communicate very well with the AEC professionals, but he's going to cover the details. But all you need is a data standard for BIM. You'll hear terms like COBE. You don't need to be overwhelmed by them. Google's wonderful. It stands for Construction Building Information Exchange. And at a high level, it's a list of all the data elements that you might want to have in a model connected to systems for your facilities. The good thing about it is it's a comprehensive list. The bad thing, remember rule number 3 that I talked about earlier, you're only going to want to track the data that you're keeping up to date, but it gives it good format. There are also some really exciting things happening in the construction and as-built world in terms of high definition scanning. It's coming down increasingly, and more of you are looking at it, but it's a good way to get data and tie that with your building information model. Autodesk put into beta a product called Tandem earlier this week that I'm really excited about. And to explain Tandem at a high level, it's a platform to help get owners good information about their buildings, which are getting built. The other thing, as you look, you want to engage your organization. Biting off BIM can have a lot of different aspects, but you might find support because you'll be able to share more information. And then the other thing is engage your AEC partners. They want to help get you better data. Most of them just don't know how to ask you. And then you go and you create your recipe. And your recipe, you know, it could be is just for you. Some of you might decide, hey, we're not ready for this. We're going to let it the other organizations, you know, go forward, and we're going to we don't want to be an early adopter. So one thing you could do, even if you're staying in 2D, is start, you know, a little smarter 2D where you're starting to, you know, to use blocks for equipment or things like that. As you go along, you also can do a middle level, similar to what the VA did when they started working with BIM initially, where they have blocks that they drop into the model, and I'm air quoting, you can't see me, but they would have a rough size, and you really couldn't tell what it was, but it enabled them to start experimenting with moving components around. You also might go, you know, to the end where you see the full elephant, where you're going to convert your entire campus from CAD to BIM. And work with someone like OSU, where OSU's use their BIM switch methodology. The interesting thing about watching what OSU did isn't what they did. The interesting thing about OSU is they've realized it's a powerful, they've created a powerful base model to start adding information from other places. From a nutrients perspective, as you're going along your BIM process, you're going to have to show some benefits of it. So, talking, from a higher level where I'm a reseller and I work with a lot of people in the Autodesk world, I know that better data helps make better decisions. I know there are metrics like 75% of the cost of a building is post-construction. There are other benefits you can look at. BIM gives us a common format for building data. And as we move more towards digital twins and smart cities and smart campuses, BIM is going to play a big part in that because it gives a place for all those IoT sensors to sit in. You can't have IoT sensors sitting in space. There's a graphical component. And if I look to these sessions that we had earlier, when Amy talked about what she did at the University of Wisconsin, one of the places she found a lot of value was visualization. And I highlighted that because Joe's talked about, and I've heard DeVon talk about that as well. But the other thing she saw, there was a higher level of customer satisfaction. And again, when she bit off the BIM elephant, they looked at using BIM for new projects of a certain dollar value. So it was in that vein. When you looked at DeVon went looking at the earlier sessions, and he took a very maintenance-centric approach to help get data into their systems. But if you look at the left, having that common format of building data to start to tie things together, is another benefit. And if you look at what Joe did at OSU, he did a very spatial approach. And one of the things he did is he converted his campus as he went out and field verified. And that was a win for him because it helped get more accurate data, which helped do different things. The other thing, though, is he went for a good spatial core data, which gave him kind of a background and a palette to start adding more complexity to over time. So that being said, I'm going to hand things off to DeVon.
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon to you. Hopefully, everyone's doing well. Like Peter said, my name is DeVon Miller. I've been here with Western a little over 7 years now in facilities management. I work in our engineering division. I have, over 15 years experience in project management, focusing primarily on energy conservation, building automation systems, and building commissioning. And here at Western, my primary focus is oversee all our building commissioning projects on campus, but also very heavily involved with our adoption of and implementation of BIM for our capital projects here on campus. So one of the biggest things I want to kind of focus on is, when we went down this path for implementing BIM here at Western, one of the things that, we need to do is ask certain questions to us, for us, how were we going to use new and existing construction models? That was the first thing we need to kind of ask to really fully understand what was going to be the purpose of these models. We're going to, train employees to do this stuff in-house, or what have you. What do we plan on doing with the models? For us, two things I'm going to focus on really is going to be visualize existing building spaces and retrieve important equipment data that is regularly maintained. So first, let's go to visualization existing buildings. So like many of you, what you're going to see is many of the things, before we started BIM, everything was in 2D. So we had, construction plans and simple floor plans and so be it. So one of the things that we really want to do is be able to visualize these spaces. That was something that Peter had mentioned earlier. That was our primary focus. That's really the thing that really got us started with our BIM process. That was our initial goal, was to be able to visualize these spaces in the 3D realm. And so what you'll see on the left there is the actual building. And then you can see how we transitioned from that to a 3D model. And then you can see how we were able now to be able to see that simple floor plan on the top there, how it looks in a 3D version. So that was our initial goal was to be able to better visualize these spaces. The next question really we had to ask ourselves is how much BIM detail or level of development do we want these models to be? And I'm kind of give you different, you probably heard this terminology before, these different LOD levels. So for us, we had to kind of decide, how detailed that we want these models to be. And I'm pretty much focusing on our existing buildings because that's what we started with. So, you have LOD 100, which is more for conceptual modeling, LOD 200, which is, general modeling. 3 get up to, accurate modeling, shop drawings. 4, fabrication. 5, be able to, 500, be able to maintain it. So for our existing buildings, we're somewhere between LOD 200 to LOD 300. We kind of call it, LOD 250, I guess. But all of our new construction buildings, any capital projects that we do where, we have a firm or doing our drawings, we are at LOD 500. So moving on to our next. Now that we had, we went through all this process, asked our questions, these things, and we start developing these existing models. We had all these models that had nothing in them. They were just nice visualization pieces for us to better visualize what these spaces were. So we were kind of thinking, okay, what is really the next step for us to kind of explore? So that was the I. So if you think of BIM, building, M, model, the next is I. So we wanted to kind of, explore what we want to do with the I portion of BIM. So with that, we thought about, well, what things do we regularly maintain on a regular basis? What things do we touch? What things to make sense to add into these models? So for us, we started looking at, adding maintainable mechanical equipment. And so with that approach, we needed to kind of touch base with our trades personnel and find out, okay, we have our existing CMMS system has all these different parameters, well, what information is really important? What information is important for them to have, to better maintain that asset? So we were able to narrow down all these different parameters, which is over 100 that's currently in our CMMS. We narrowed it down to 20 that were very critical to our trades personnel for them to be able to maintain that particular asset. So what you'll see here is those 20 parameters that we came up with, anything from the type of equipment is to the subtype equipment, where it's located, who the manufacturer is, the model, the serial number, the filter type, filter size, quantity, the motor ID, motor model number, and so forth. Okay, gives you some general understanding of those are some of the critical pieces of that equipment that our trade said is really important for them to be able to maintain it. Now, once this information was in the model, the next thing that we wanted to kind of take a bite of is, okay, now we have these models that have this equipment in there. How are our trades going to be able to access these models and pull that information out? So, the next step for us to kind of approach was, we were actually in the process of our trades going from a PDA to iPads, as we were using iPads now with for work orders and things of that nature. So it only made it easy to them to be able to use the iPads now to be able to pull up the model. So as you see here is the process that we went through to now be able to use this smart device to be able to access models. So, we created the BIM model, we exported the Revit, to a Navisworks model. And then it's stored, on our, what we call our B drive or our network. And then at the time we were using the Autodesk 360 Glue app for them to be able to pull that model up and view it. And so you actually can see down in each one of those things, you actually can see the model and the actual piece of equipment that was modeled, and that's what you're seeing them look at on their iPads, which is, replication of what's there in this space. So really what I'm just trying to convey to you guys is that, as Peter mentioned earlier, is, take the BIM process in little bitty, chunks and so that you don't bite off too much, because it can be overwhelming. Do one thing, and once you get that done, move on to the next step. Once you get that game, then move on to the next step. Doing this, like I said, with our existing buildings, we were able to now really truly understand what is really important to us to develop our BIM standard for what we call the big BIM, the capital projects, which, like I said, is a little bit more involved, but helped us basically develop that standard to develop our BIM standards for our capital construction projects. So I believe that was my last slide, but let me make sure. So now I'll turn it over to Joe, and he can kind of go over from there.
Thanks, DeVon. So I'm Joe Porostosky, and I've been at Ohio State for about 12 years. And I'm the Director of Facilities Information and Technology Services. Our team has 3 different teams within it. One is Architectural Services. We manage all of the BIM initiatives for the university. We keep all the building models up to date for our existing facilities, and we do a lot of room numbering for all of our projects. The GIS team handles campus mapping and the entire infrastructure behind our GIS environment, including application development. We do handle all the addressing on campus, and a lot of custom mapping and data analytics. And then we have the data services team. All the types of space reporting we do, whether it be to federal, state, or internal reporting, and slicing and dicing the data in a lot of different ways, auditing our spaces, including handling all of our record document archiving post-project. So that's basically our team. Now, what I kind of want to share with you today is how we actually approach building our models and the processes that we've put into place that have allowed us to be successful over the last 9 to 10 years in getting to where we are today, which is around 34 million square feet that we've modeled into Revit. And we like to think of this in 3 steps, in the gather, build, and check step. Now, we use a lot of students, and because of that, we want to make sure that we have extraordinarily detailed processes and standards, because we want all of these models that we build to be the same level of quality and accuracy and standardization from year to year, regardless of what student is actually doing the development of the model. And so for the first week, we have a pretty intensive training. That's not the end of the training. We actually have training then pretty much every week. It's up for some amount of time, whether it be just an hour or half an hour throughout the summer as they learn new skills and have different questions. But we try to get them up to speed on our process that first week. The first step then of any new building is the gather step. We're going to collect any drawings that we have. That's going to be looking through our archive and finding any record documentation that we have. It's also going to be looking at existing AutoCAD that we have in our owner plan. Now, we do some buildings from scratch so that you don't always have that owner plan available. But if we do, we collect that also. Then we do a field verification process, which I'll mention in a moment, to ensure that we have really good data as we move into the build step. Now, build step obviously is the one that takes the longest amount of time. It's just the process of building that Revit model. But then we also finish up with the check step, where we have a couple different methods of doing some automated and then some visual checking of the model that the student does. Then the BIM coordinator is going to do those same checks and a little bit more of a detailed visual audit. And that process is just going to be iterated until the BIM coordinator feels very comfortable with where that model is at. And when the model is of good quality, it's complete, it meets all of our expectations, the model is done, and we've just completed another building. So from a field verification perspective, one thing that we've gotten really particular about is how the field verification process should occur. In fact, we went through a kind of a big revision of it a number of years ago, because our goal is to really get out to the field, look at a building, and just do that one time. We don't want to have to go out more than one time. It's really going to slow down our process. And so we have a lot of instructions on exactly how we want the students to approach the building, how to take pictures and what to take pictures of, and what kind of data are you collecting while you're out there. We use 360 cameras for all of our data collection now, for the most part, which has really sped up the ability to collect a lot of data about our buildings quickly, because we need a lot more information than a 2D drawing is going to provide us. We also talk about how to take a certain number of measurements of the building to ensure that the accuracy of the existing AutoCAD that we're trying to base this new model off of is high enough. We want to be within 2% of what the actual measurements are. And so we talk about how to go about through that process and how to actually do the math on that, and making sure that they're walking most of the building to ensure that we haven't missed a project in the past with our AutoCAD. So really ensuring, having a good process for that field verification step for us ensures that we're taking fewer visits to the field and getting a lot more data that we can use in building the model going forward. The next step is just obviously modeling. As I mentioned, that's our biggest step, obviously, and we've again had to develop really clear processes for what do you do and when do you do it and how do you do it, and what order do you do that, to ensure that we are building the model correctly, building it in a standardized way, but also being efficient in the way that we do things. One of the things that we discovered along the way, a prime example of this, is ensuring that we get GIS coordinates in the model in the best possible way. This is actually was a lot harder for us. We actually worked with a consultant for a little while on this to try to figure out what's the appropriate way to think about survey points and project-based points and project north, and because we wanted to make sure that wherever this model landed, whether it ended up in our GIS or whether it was used in BIM 360, or we were just trying to connect adjacent buildings together, that those coordinates would work in any of those resultant systems. And so we really had to beat this process up till we got it just right to ensure that it would always work regardless of what system it went into. We wrap it up though with an auditing process. Now, when we started building models back in 2011, it was a manual process by our BIM coordinator, and it was definitely painful. She would have to dig through these models. It would take 2 to 3 days on an average size building to visually look at these models to see what do they do right, what do they not do right, what do they need to adjust, documenting all that, and just realizing that process, it was error prone. It was a pretty frustrating process in general for her, and it was just taking forever, and it was slowing down our ability to really advance the project. So in 2013, we introduced Deliverable, which was an IFC-based model checking software. Allowed us to automate a lot of our model checking, in addition to checking things that we really couldn't check as easily before, like wall joins. And so it allowed the students to do a pre-check of a lot of their model before our BIM coordinator ever saw it. So we went from 2 to 3 days down to an average of about 1 day for the model checking process, the auditing process by our full-time staff, and the quality was a lot higher than it was before. And then 2016, we added the Revit Model Checker, which is a free tool with Autodesk. That allowed us to check things specific to Revit, because Deliverable is an IFC-based tool, so it's not checking Revit-specific things. And that allowed us then to shave another couple of hours off of our model checking process and get it down to roughly around a half of a day. So using these tools all together and has allowed us to be much more efficient in the model checking process and be able to also have a much higher level of quality and standardization of our models going forward. The last thing I want to mention here is that along the way, we developed a lot of our tools. And I mentioned this a little bit in the last webinar, if you happen to be on that one, that what we found ways to simplify some of our processes and speed them up to allow us to get through more models in less time. And a couple of them, the first two are related to the subspace tool and the space ideas, allowing us to create a space ID for every room in our models. For us, that's a unique identifier across the entire campus for each one of our rooms. And this allowed us to automatically create those space IDs from information in the model, as opposed to hand typing them in, which was taking around a day for an average size model. And as you can imagine, it's very error prone. If you're just sitting there all day long typing numbers, a string of numbers, and that really reduced this down to a couple of seconds. And really, the error has to be somewhere else at that point. And also the sheet creator tool, which allows us to create a sheet one time, get it right just the way we want it, push a button, and it creates all the rest of the sheets for us. Again, this is a way to reduce the amount of time it takes us to build our model, and also allows us to speed up the process or improve the accuracy, making sure we're not making mistakes in creating those extra sheets. And one of the things that we've done with all of this stuff that we've developed is we've thrown it all in this package called BIM Switch. And it's our processes, it's our tools, it's our family library. If this is something that sounds interesting to you, you can always contact Peter Costanzo, who you already heard from at IMAGINiT. He can let you know, talk to you a little more about the product. It may make sense for you, may not, might be worth a look. But it's just it's our process. It's the way that we've approached moving from CAD to BIM at Ohio State. With that, I'm gonna turn it over to TJ.
Great,
Great, thanks, Joe. Hi, everyone, I'm TJ. Some of you have heard from me before. If you're interested, here's my entire life boiled down into 7 bullets, 25 years, and that's all I got out of it. But I'm excited to be here today, and I think I'm just gonna press forward and dive into the topic. So, as you just heard from DeVon and Joe, they have approached BIM a little differently, and they broke the elephant down into parts. And so that's what I'm going to do too, is let's look at that from a high level. Instead of this one giant BIM elephant, there are really kind of 3 areas that you can focus on at first. And so the first area is space management, right? Tracking the square footages of your spaces. That can be very important from a higher education standpoint. Asset management is another one. That's tracking all that equipment, maintainable equipment, and making sure your facilities are functioning correctly. And then the third one I'm calling as-built management, which is effectively having quality backgrounds, quality as-builts of your facilities that you can use for renovation projects. And those 3 together make up kind of the big buckets that you want to focus on in BIM. If you've participated in the previous sessions, you know that Joe at OSU has focused on space management. They really spent their initial time making sure they have accurate models of the spaces in their facilities, and they've expanded from that since then, but that was the first bite of the elephant they took off. DeVon at Western Michigan has focused on asset management from the beginning. They were very concerned about the equipment and maintaining that equipment. And so their models were very low LOD, and they were really focused on getting this major equipment in so that they could maintain it throughout. And then University of Wisconsin, Amy was focused on having as-builts, on having good quality as-builts that they could use for their renovation projects to do design and construction. And so they each tackled it a little bit differently. And each one of those buckets has kind of smaller pieces to it that you could focus on. For example, the as-built management, you might simply say, you know what, for the first 6 months, all I care about is that we do clash coordination for our design and construction projects to make sure we're having less ROIs and we're staying on budget in time. And that might be, less RFIs. And that might be the ROI that you want, the return on investment you want from BIM, right? So it really depends. I have this anecdotal story of a higher education facility who was not tracking their square footages very well in space management, and it turned out they were missing out on almost $900,000 in funding because they didn't have the right square footages and coupled that with the right students. So, there's certainly a case to be made for having accurate space management drawings. Regardless of the path you go down, the key to your success is good data. I'm sure you've all heard the old adage, garbage in, garbage out, right? If you get bad CAD files, you can't do a lot with them. If one consultant submits CAD files with this layering system and another consultant submits it with this layering system, you've probably all had to deal with translating that, spending time to manipulate that. And that's just 2D. That's just simple 2D CAD files. What happens when you have a model that has 3-dimensional geometry and the embedded data with it? And let's be honest, data is what manages your facility. I'll have you go forward there, Peter. So, oh, sorry, Lisa, you're the one driving today. So the key here is that graphics are important. What you see is important, and it varies throughout the life cycle of that project. But data is ever increasing. Ah, there it is. Look at that. So through schematic design, development, construction into operations, more and more data is added and more data is necessary to be able to manage a facility. I mean, very few building engineers pull out a set of drawing plans, pull out a set to look at. They just look at the ticket and it says, oh, go fix equipment X in location Y by doing Z to it. And that's just data on a screen. So it's critically important that your data is accurate and standardized. So how do you make sure that you have good data? How do you make sure that starting down this path, what are the easy steps you can take to get quality standardized data? So I'm gonna touch on 5 things today. And the first one is a good set of BIM requirements. So BIM requirements really do a few things for you. A BIM requirements document is both documenting a standard process to follow during building information modeling and what the deliverables should look like. Those deliverables being the models. And those models have both graphics and data in them, and it's important that you consider both in them. I'll point out that LOD is very important, level of development, and that's a great way to put a metric on how detailed a model is. But in my experience, the vast majority of LOD definitions out there, even the very best ones, are really focused on the graphics, and very few are focused on data. DeVon showed a slide earlier that I thought was fantastic. On the left side of the slide was his screenshot from his web TMA, which is their asset management system, and there are over 100 data fields in there. But when it came to the Revit model, they had boiled it down to the 20 critical parameters that they wanted in that Revit model. And so a BIM requirements document would be defining exactly what those are. And most people treat a BIM requirements document as a contract addendum. And so that makes people your consultants working with you tied to that contract and meeting those requirements. So a BIM requirements document is typically an overarching document. It's something that you want to include in every BIM project that you're working on. And keep in mind, out of the gate, the way to eat the elephant is not to make every project a BIM project, but to focus on one at a time and slowly expand that. Continue using your boilerplate design and construction contract, but then use your BIM requirements as an addendum to the BIM jobs you want. Now, most of you have probably heard of a BIM execution plan, and that's really what people talk about when they talk about making BIM work. BIM execution plans are critical, but they are project specific. Every BIM project should have a BIM execution plan, which is letting all the stakeholders in the project know, yourself, your consultants, including your design, your GC, your subs, who's doing what when, and to what LOD, what level of detail. But defining what those things mean, defining what those process steps are, defining what those modeling requirements are, defining what LOD means to you, and what your data standards are and your graphic standards, that should all be handled in the BIM requirements document. And the BIM execution plan is just the steps we're going to take to meet those requirements for this project. And so keep that in mind, because often you will hire a consultant to build your BIM standards for you, and they may only give you a BIM execution plan that's like a melding of both BIM requirements and a BIM execution plan. You really want to keep those separate. So many of you have your own libraries that you give out even to consultants, saying, hey, here's our standard furniture blocks or workstation blocks. Here's our standard lighting fixture blocks, and put those in your CAD files. Well, it's great to have a graphic library of elements. And if you're using Revit, you may even have a family library that you give out, but you also want to have data libraries. A great way to make sure that people are giving you the data you want is to pre-build lists of that data, so they just choose from the list, right? There's no need to have them continually type things in, because they might do it all uppercase or lowercase, or they might abbreviate this word or not that word. And your data becomes inconsistent, let alone putting it in the right parameter. So having pick lists of data can be really critical. There are standard classification systems like OmniClass and Uniformat, Master Format, and FICM, but you can also create your own custom pick lists. And probably the top example of that is equipment subcategories. The majority of people are building models for you in Revit. Revit has categories of the elements inside of it, like mechanical equipment, electrical equipment, plumbing fixtures, specialty equipment. but they're way too high level for how you're actually going to manage those things. Mechanical equipment is just too broad of a category. So most owners say, oh, well, put a parameter in, we're going to call it subcategory. That way I can tell that piece of mechanical equipment that it's a boiler or a chiller or air handling unit or a VAV box. So why not build your own pick list, your own list of data that you'd want people to choose from on what your standards are for the name of that equipment and the abbreviation. So it becomes P1 for pump number 1 in this project, or VAV2 or whatever. And there are lots of ways you can use pick lists, asset codes. Joe is just talking about how they do unique identifiers in their rooms. And in order to generate those unique identifiers, they're probably based on categories of rooms. So why not have those categories also as a pick list that people can choose from? So they're not just making up that, this is a corridor versus a hallway, right? So pick lists are very important. The best way to handle pick lists is through the classification manager. This is a free tool. Anybody who has Revit has a classification manager, and you can build your list right in an Excel file and give it to your consultants, and they can, instead of typing things in, just pick right from that file and populate all the fields that you want them to populate. Of course, once you develop your standards and you give your consultants tools to be able to meet those requirements, how do you check that they're actually doing it? And we just saw that Joe has implemented back in 2016 the model checking using the model checker, and you should be doing the same thing. You can plug in these data rules into the model checker, your own data rules based on what you want, and have people run it on it. And the majority of times they can run the model checker on their models in 2 minutes or less and get a detailed report of where they're meeting the requirements and where they're not meeting the requirements. And if they're not meeting them, they can zoom right to that element and update it. They don't even have to leave Revit to do that. That's the fourth one. Let's talk about the fifth one, which is a data deliverable. So in a model, you're having your consultants put in the graphics and the data, the information in BIM, the I in BIM, into those models. But you're not going to manage that data from the models moving forward generally. You have systems to do that. You probably have a space management system, which tracks all the room names and all the occupants and all the other data in that room. And so that the Revit models really just help me define the square footage and a unique identifier connection, usually the room number for it, but all that other data is maintained somewhere else. Same with assets. I don't need to have the Revit model manage the warranty information, the model number, the serial number, the manufacturing date. All of that data doesn't need to be managed in the Revit model, but it's initially collected in there, and then you want to transfer that data to your asset management system, whether that's Maximo or Archibus or whatever that is. So you do that through a data deliverable. As part of your BIM process, you say to your consultants, hey, take the data that is in the Revit model that you've been asked to collect, export that to a data deliverable, a standardized format, so that I can import it into my asset management system and be ready to go day one. And COBie is the universal standard for that right now. You don't have to use COBie, but it is a great way because a lot of people understand it. And so that construction operations building information exchange is really just a data format. Most people do that as an Excel file. And the COBie extension for Revit can gather all the data in the Revit model and export it to this standardized formatted Excel file so that your Archibus, Maximo, FM Systems, Tririga, whatever it is, can import it and use that data. And you don't have to have somebody manually typing that in. All right, so those are 5 ways you can take a bite out of the elephant. I talked about some tools in there, the model checker, the classification manager, the COBie extension. Those are all free tools. This website lets you get additional assets for those tools, whether it's downloading templates or sample files, links to the YouTube channel on videos 10 minutes or less on how to use them all. But they pop up as a default Revit installation. So feel free to use those and reach out to us if you have any questions on them.
So kind of closing things out, talking about how to digest BIM. So from a next step, develop a game plan. First question is your organization ready? If you are, I encourage you to talk to your peers. There are a lot of you on the phone at different places, in your thing, and put together a plan that you can define and execute on. One of the things that I think is important, don't forget the AEC partners that serve you. They're looking to give you better data as well. And you should find some pretty willing participants as you look at, your world where both you have your existing facilities and you've got your new facilities coming. And then similar to kind of where I talked earlier, once you start down this path, this is a 15, 20-year mark. This is a seismic shift if you think about it. Back in the 80s, when I wasn't here yet, we had the paper to CAD conversion. And some of you that are on the phone were here during that time, and you did a lot of work to take, paper drawings and put your universities in CAD. We're in another seismic shift, which is similar to that, where you've got another tool. So as you do it, it's something you can definitely bite off slowly over time. So one of the benefits of being a CFTA member, CFTA 2 years ago was looking for a repository where they could have some training for their members, and also a place they could put up content. And IMAGINiT, as a part of our sponsorship, we have a big support infrastructure, so we carved out an area for CFTA. And this seminar is kind of the first in content where we'll start to populate that area. So the first thing was to talk about BIM, and I think Ann and Sue were looking at doing GIS next. But if you go up there, there's some data. You'll see these websites. You'll see some posts. And if you click along, Lisa, I'm going to show everyone how simple that can be. So you got your cute little elephant on the spoon. And I say this because a lot of you have access to this, but you haven't looked at it. And sorry, Lisa, if you click once, you'll notice I've highlighted 2 areas there. On the left, there's a file structure, and it says Campus FM Technology Association. And on the right, you see a little graduation cap. Lisa, if you click along. So if you go into the CFTA dropdown, you'll see there, you can see that there are 3 videos loaded there. So Ann's gone up and loaded this, and she's put some additional documents. And the purpose of this repository is to update so you all have a way to compare notes. So Ann will be adding to this some links to what Joe's done at OSU, some links to what DeVon's done, and the purpose of this is to grow over time. The other thing I want to specify is there's free training in here. And yes, I use the word free. So if you click along again, Lisa, I'm going to talk again, if I went into if I clicked on the little graduation cap, it would bring up another menu that would look like this. And I searched for Revit training, and I did a subset. I only looked at what was in Revit 2021. And you can see a whole list of courses there. The ones listed there are self-paced. And Lisa, if you go along one more time, as we start to kind of talk about value, we've posted up there a class that we sell for $495, which is basically Revit kind of for project managers, with people not digging all the way in. But I want to point out that there's a lot of valuable content up there that might help even as you're just trying to orientate people. And these are benefits you have as being part